Hey, everybody. It's time for another episode of the Flagship Podcast. I'm Chip Brown of Horns247.com, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and proud Tampa Catholic graduate, the one and only Eric Henry. Eric, lots to get into on the show today. Some Texas football, of course. They have a new quarterback in their quarterback room. We'll get into that. Quinn Ewers' agent had some things to say about Quinn Ewers sliding and maybe being too big of a name to hold a clipboard. We'll look back on the Pancake Factory and its significance. One of those little long forgotten Texas NIL initiatives that paid some nice dividends for the Horns. And Justin Tucker released from the Ravens. We'll get into that. And the players we're not talking enough about. The Texas Longhorns on offense and defense, who will have significant roles, but we're not talking enough about them. And then we'll touch on, Shawn Miller's new basketball contract and where Texas baseball is and Texas softball. So, and of course, everyone's favorite, take it or leave it. So thanks again for joining us. Settle in and let's get into it. Eric, the big news coming off the weekend for Texas football, a new quarterback in the room. Now, it's his name is Matthew Caldwell. He started his college career at Jacksonville State. Then he spent 2 years at Gardner-Webb. I didn't even know Gardner-Webb had a football team. But he then transferred to Troy, and he started 6 games there last year, including a game at Iowa, and completed 63% of his passes, 13 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. But I think it's important to note, Eric, that this is, first of all, Steve Sarkisian likes to have 4 scholarship quarterbacks. He only had 3. Arch Manning, Trey Owens, and KJ Lacey. So this gives him a 4th. It gives him a 5th-year senior veteran presence who, probably understands there's a good chance he'll never play a snap this season. But if all hell breaks loose and something happens to Arch Manning and something happens to Trey Owens, well, you might have an option of playing a veteran over a true freshman. Your thoughts on this, Eric?
Yeah, Chip, first off, as always great to be back on with you Wednesday or Thursday, depending on how the schedule lines up for us to tape another episode of the Flagship Podcast. Also, for those of you loyal, longtime listeners, even before yours truly was on the Flagship Podcast, you may remember the state of recruiting. And Chip, it's making its way back. Coming soon. Hank South, Will Turboff, Jordan Scruggs, the whole crew, they will be bringing back the state of recruiting. So keep an eye out for that. Go ahead, Chip.
And subscribe to the Horns247 YouTube channel so that you do not miss a notification about when the recruiting state of recruiting podcast hits, and for your entertainment pleasure, infotainment pleasure.
That is the quickest way to know when an episode is dropping. You subscribe to YouTube, you get that notification, and it pops up on your screen when we go live like this. All right, so back to Matthew Caldwell. Yeah, Chip, it's interesting. I laugh because it just seems like anything that is even within the stratosphere of Arch Manning is going to be some sort of talking point, and it's probably going to be overblown, and people are going to be like, oh man, it was real interesting, Chip. I don't know if you paid attention to some of the social media reaction, right? But for me, at least what I saw, ranged from who and why is he coming here to, oh my gosh, Arch must not be as good as we think he is. Is it time to panic? Like, all right, Chip made the point, right? And even in the NFL, right? You remember, at least I won't say back in the day, but I was growing up, some teams carried 4 quarterbacks because you knew quarterbacks were going to get hurt, right? Especially in college, where you have certainly much more of a roster limit to do so. Teams typically will want 4, sometimes even 5 scholarship quarterbacks, right? It just the math didn't make sense for Texas to go into this season in which Steve Sarkisian has stated he wants all his guys to be prepared that once we lock in come June and going through July, you're not going to be done until mid-January of next year. Of course, the College Football Playoff national title game is January 18th down in South Florida. I believe that date is January 18th. So you're going to need a lot of bodies. And then you take into account the fact that Texas, it's been a long time, the best, unpaid internship in the history of Texas sports media. Chris Bennett, I'm sure will drop that number. I need to just screenshot it every time he drops it because I'm always trying to research and I'm like, Chris Bennett has this somewhere stored away. And I end up defaulting back to the fact that Texas has not started one quarterback in Steve Sarkisian's entire 4-year tenure entering his 5th year, but it's been much longer than that the Longhorns have had to start multiple quarterbacks, right? So you want to knock on wood that Arch Manning is not going to get banged up, but the odds are that he will miss, whether it is an entire game, whether it's a start, or at some point in a game, he may have to come out. And why not set up your quarterback room for success there, right? So I don't think this is an indictment on, Trey Owens. I saw some people say, oh man, this must means that, they're down on Trey. No, Chip, you remember how effusive Steve Sarkisian was in his praise of Trey Owens post the spring game last year, talking about, no disrespect to the people who do stars, but we have our own evaluation, which I would say Steve kind of made that comment as if Trey Owens was a 2-star quarterback. He was a 4-star coming out of Houston Sci-Fair, right? He wasn't just, some guy. But the team is still high on Trey Owens and KJ Lacey. I just think it makes sense to bring in a guy like Caldwell, who has over 24 games of collegiate experience, most recently at Troy. The reason why he is leaving Troy, at least as best I understand it from talking with some people close to the G5 landscape, which of course I covered for a while, is Troy has a quarterback, Will Crowder, Goose Crowder, one of the better nicknames in college football, especially for a quarterback, who started the year and was banged up, but they really like him. Gerard Parker down there at Troy really like him. So he's going to be taking the starting role. And this late in the game, Chip, and this is the point I made when I talked about Caldwell's arrival, is it's probably better, and I don't know what his future aspirations are, whether it's coaching or whatever it may be, but it's probably better at this stage in the game to go be a QB2, best case scenario, QB2, or even a QB3 at Texas, as opposed to trying to get in here, post-spring, pre-fall, and being competing for a QB1 at where, best case scenario from a lower tier G5 or probably an FCS school, right? So this is probably a better scenario for him. So I think that kind of gives you a well-rounded kind of synopsis of Matthew Caldwell's arrival and the role he's going to play on this team.
Yeah. No, it's well said. And look, if you're not going to be the starter at Troy, why not come be a part of a team that's going for it, that is trying to win an SEC and national championship this season and have that experience? I mean, Jacksonville State, Gardner-Webb, Troy, Texas, not a bad way to finish things off, I'd say. And Steve Sarkisian, who's done pretty well with quarterbacks, thinks you're a good enough insurance policy for his quarterback room. So come on down. Speaking of quarterbacks, Eric, Quinn Ewers' agent, Ron Slavven, told ESPN that, once Quinn Ewers, started falling, that maybe teams were reluctant to take him past the 3rd or 4th round because he was, quote, too big of a name to hold a clipboard. And of course, Quinn Ewers ended up going in the 7th round to the Miami Dolphins. And I think both you and I feel like that's a really good place for Quinn Ewers to land. I think it's a better place for him to land than where Shedeur Sanders landed in Cleveland, where they had drafted Dylan Gabriel in the 3rd round. They have Kenny Pickett. They have Joe Flacco. Right now, they still have Deshaun Watson under contract, but that looks like it'll change. Your thoughts on Ron Slavin's comment?
It was interesting. It was interesting. I understand damage control, right? And I think that's what Ron Slavin, part of what he is paid to do. I just didn't necessarily know if it was necessary here. And I'm not critiquing it because, again, I understand, right? Like Quinn Ewers, the guy, seemingly gets talked about for anything, right? And we saw some of the conversation post the draft. Well, he should have transferred to X school or should have done this, right? Which is not taking into account the totality of what Quinn Ewers wanted his college football experience to be and what he wanted his legacy at Texas to be, right? I guess the only thing that gives me a little bit of pause is I just didn't know, Chip, and we talked about this a little bit off here, if damage control is really necessary at this point. It's done. The decision's done. He's not going back to college. We know this. He was drafted where he was drafted. And, I talked about this and wrote about this seemingly, and I guess I shouldn't say seemingly. Let me give you my perspective. If Quinn wasn't going to be a second or third round pick, right? Because we knew he wasn't going in the first round. We thought if Quinn was not going to be a second or third round pick, this is probably the best case scenario for him. Go, 6th, 7th round. Chip, when's the last time? And forgive me, I can't remember if we talked about this specific aspect last week. If we did, I apologize. But when is the last time Quinn Ewers has taken a snap at quarterback in which all of the pressure and all the spotlight hasn't been on him? We know South Lake Carroll's history of football and competing for state titles, right? He makes a decision that lined up with NIL being, enacted, right? To go to Ohio State, forgo his senior year. That automatically puts a spotlight on him because of the number that was attached to his NIL, or perceived number attached to his NIL deal. Then he comes home to Texas and is expected to be the guy who brings Texas out of college ball mediocrity and back into college ball prominence, right? Now, Quinn gets just go be a 7th round pick and play football. I mean, I can't think of a better situation. A, the spotlight is off him. B, he's going to an offense that Steve Sarkisian said has, similarities to what Texas likes to do. So I think at this point, again, I understand, the damage control aspect, but I think at this point, the spotlight is now coming off of Quinn for the first time in his very young adult life. Like just let it be. So that's kind of what I took away from him more than anything else, Chip.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I mean, the thing that I don't think a lot of people know about Quinn is he took that $1.4 million from Panini by going to Ohio State. I think for his family, I think his family needed that money, and he did that for his family. And then at that point, he was like, okay, I'm in control of my football decisions from here on out. And of course, we know he turned down big money to transfer, play somewhere else, and by saying I wanted my legacy to be at Texas. I wanted to be the quarterback at Texas. I want to maintain my connection to Texas. And look, I've reported he earned upwards of $6 million in NIL. That's excluding the $1.4 million. So over $7 million in 3 years, 4 years of college football. And he's got the luxury of having some money in the bank and being able to go somewhere where hopefully it is a good spot. Miami, he's got Tua Tagovailoa and Zach Wilson in that quarterback room. They don't even have a third quarterback. So if they're going to carry 3, Quinn's, and we saw Mike McDaniels kind of eyeballing Quinn when he was throwing at Pro Day 2 years ago. And so I think this is good. And I would just say, let Quinn do his own talking because he's a super smart guy. He's reserved to an extent, but he's got a lot of thoughts. And I think he does just fine, repping himself, because there were some other comments by Ron Slavin, who's a very passionate agent and is very, passionately representing his client, Quinn Ewers. But, there was some talk about, well, he couldn't have transferred because he would have had to have left his team during the college football playoff. And, again, like you said, it's water under the bridge. Keep that, airplanes don't have rear view mirrors. Just keep looking out the windshield here. as you look forward. So, yeah, I think Quinn Ewers in a good spot, and not sure about too big of a name to hold a clipboard. Maybe Shedeur Sanders, because of just what a big personality Shedeur Sanders has been in his time in college football. I wouldn't say that about Quinn. I thought Quinn was a super, dialed in teammate. He wasn't making headlines with his quotes. Eric, the Pancake Factory, which was a Texas NIL initiative that was launched December 6th, 2021. And at the time, it, 501c3 nonprofit, said that each scholarship offensive lineman would be getting paid $50,000 a piece to do some charitable work if at Texas. Well, that recruiting cycle, Texas ended up landing Kelvin Banks, DJ Campbell, Neto Umezulu, Cam Williams, and Malik Agbo, all of whom committed after the Pancake Factory was announced. And then on December 15th, 9 days after the Pancake Factory was announced, Texas landed the top offensive line class in the nation in the 2022 recruiting cycle. They would eventually get the commitment or signing of DJ Campbell, who ended up signing on February 2nd. But it's now a footnote, and it seems antiquated that $50,000, which, Steve Sarkisian's even joked, oh man, I wish it was only $50,000 in today's NIL market. But real quickly, the two guys who started it are two guys who have a fan website. Surlyhorns.com used to be Shaggy Bevo, Rick Vasquez and Rob Blair. They started the Burnt Ends program that paid tight ends, each of Texas's tight ends, including a walk-on, $10,000 a piece for the 2021 season. That actually started in September. And then they came up with the Pancake Factory. And it was this sort of divine timing for Texas because, Eric, that offensive line class has turned into something special. Obviously, Kelvin Banks was just drafted number 9 overall in the first round. Cam Williams was drafted in the 6th round by the world champion Philadelphia Eagles. And all 7 of those signees were with the program through the 2024 season. Malik Agbo has since transferred to West Virginia, but Neto Umezulu is going to, likely start at left guard. Cole Hudson, who was in that 2022 class, likely to start at center. Connor Robertson is likely Cole Hudson's backup at center. And so it's been, it kind of started the ball rolling in terms of Texas building the kind of roster that Steve Sarkisian wanted, large humans. And Texas had not done well in recruiting on the offensive line, or at least not done well in developing guys into NFL draft picks. They had 0 offensive linemen drafted from the 2009 draft until the 2018 draft. So to just encapsulate it, Texas had 3 offensive linemen drafted last month. That's more than they had drafted from 09 to 21. So, Eric, just a little, it was before your time on the beat, but that recruiting haul on the offensive line was pretty important to the turnaround of the program, I'd say.
Yeah, Chip, as you mentioned, right, it was before my time on the beat. So I'll just kind of take a 10,000-foot view. And I think you really, encapsulated it well when you talk about just that large gap of Texas being able to develop offensive linemen. Because I know Mike Williams went to Texas. Remind me, Leonard Davis also went to Texas,
Yep.
correct?
Mike
So
Williams was the last offensive lineman selected in the first round in 2002, before Calvin Banks was selected number 9 overall in the first round in 2024.
So yeah, 2 of the names I mentioned, I remember those guys getting drafted top 5, top 10, right? So this is what I will say, just again, taking a 10,000 foot view. I thought that was, reading the story, it was, if you haven't read it, go check it out, first off. But secondly, that was really insightful is one thing, but also just unique, right? The concept, because when you talk about NIL, right? If we're just talking about NIL in the truest form of name, image, and likeness, offensive linemen aren't typically going to do well. You know what I mean? Right. So it obviously, of course, you have Texas One Fund and other collectives. And as you mentioned, you know, the advent of the Pancake Factory, other ways to fund players. But just talking about NIL specifically, offensive linemen aren't typically going to do a ton. Right. So thought that was a genius idea to come with a way and saying, hey, this is dedicated to beefing up the big boys up front, getting some of those big humans that Steve Sarkisian desires, and give them a little change. But as you know, you noted, and Steve said, 50 grand ain't gonna get the job done now, right? There probably are offensive linemen who, once they, you know, have developed a little bit of a you know, I guess track record, could probably command, you know, 10 times that in today's NIL market. But no, I just thought it was super interesting, just that from a concept, from a, you know, conceptually to do that. Because as I mentioned, you know, NIL, you know, for the most part, you know, your guard and your center, even stud left tackles aren't going to do a ton in terms of the, you know, broader NIL stuff. Your Panini America, your insert brand, right? For the most part, those guys are going to do it. So yeah, I thought that was really, really creative on their part.
Yeah. Yeah. Shout out to Rick Vasquez and Rob Blair. Rob Blair now, one of the vice presidents in the Texas One Fund, which is the Texas collective, Texas NIL collective. And they've got a big event coming up, their big Horns Up event weekend, where donors get to play golf with Steve Sarkisian, and Leonard Skinner's going to be playing, and country music. So, and all the Texas athletes, it's their big annual fundraiser coming up not this weekend, but the next weekend. So, Eric, the player we're not talking enough about. Let's start. Of course, the player we're not talking enough about regarding the Texas Longhorns. Let's start on offense. Eric, why don't you go first?
I will go first, and I think the name is CJ Baxter. You say, why? I mean, listen, we can rehash all the things that made CJ the number 1 running back recruit in his class coming out in 2023 and all the things he's been through in his career, right? But just talking about why I believe he's not being talked about enough, someone's going to have to be RB2, okay? This is not going to be a team that has a, you know, Chip, there's no Ashton Genty, right? That's going to happen in Texas. And I'm not even saying that as a knock on any of the talents at Texas. I'm just saying the offense is not going to be designed to have one person run for 2,900 yards, whatever his Ashton Genty ran for, right? So because of that, you're going to need an RB2. We know Quintravian Wisner's going into this year as the RB1, and more or less is looking at this as kind of his contract year, right? Like, this is the year that he's got to show out to go to the next level. Well, you're going to need someone to take the load off of him. And CJ Baxter, in my mind, is the prime candidate. That's not shading Jarrett Gibson, who, of course, is healthy in camp. That's not shading any of the true freshmen who arrived this year, Simon and Ricky Stewart. That's not shading Christian Clark, who's coming back from his own injury. It's just that when you look at CJ's prior production, which I genuinely feel his true freshman year in 2023, if it all depends on what prism you want to view it through. If you want to view it through the prism of a young back who is really growing and developing, you think it's a great year. If you view it through the prism of the nation's number 1 running back recruit who, you know, opened the year as a starter and then had some issues with staying healthy and whatnot, and then gave way to Jonathan Brooks, then you may view it as a failure. But I just felt that there was a natural trajectory and natural progression in CJ's game that would have happened last year that hopefully you'll see with the coming off, recovering from this injury, if he can recapture that. But for the purposes of this offense, I think CJ Baxter being healthy and being the best version that he can be this year, because I truly think, Chip, next year will be the test for CJ, right? I mean, just that injury is so I don't want to say devastating, but it's a significant injury, and it's hard to come back from that. No matter how much modern medicine has progressed, hard to come back from that in just 1 year, right? But if he can give you the best version of what his physical ability will allow you to be this year, I think that's a much needed weapon in Texas's offense.
Yeah, and remember, we've talked about this in the past with CJ. He played primarily in a gap scheme in high school at Orlando Edgewater. And, he took him a minute to get used to all the zone run, the outside zone, the inside zone, where you're pressing the line and looking for that crease and then getting through that crease. And it'll be interesting to see how evolved he is in terms of being comfortable running in the zone scheme after having the limited amount of carries that he had in his freshman year. And he still, ran for nearly 700 yards, but then missing the entire year last year. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, if CJ Baxter, who is a leader on the team, a guy that the others respect, he's a great teammate. I think that's a good call. I'm going to go with Cole Hudson, who is likely to be Texas's new center for the first time in 6 years, because the last 5 years it's been Jake Majors, who now has the school record for career starts with 57. Think about that, folks. So, Cole Hudson, he started every game his freshman year as the right guard, and he did that with a labrum tear in his shoulder. Super tough guy. And he had the corrective surgery. And then, of course, last year he was rotating some with DJ Campbell at right guard, and is a guy who is a leader on that line. And it was good to hear Steve Sarkisian saying that they're getting the best version of DJ Campbell they've gotten, because DJ obviously was being subbed for at times. And it sounds like Cole Hudson and DJ Campbell are working well together. And that's going to be critical too, because you've got Neto Umazulu, who's been in the program. He knows the ways, but Trevor Gooseby is going to be likely starting at left tackle as a redshirt
sophomore, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Brandon Baker, who will be a first-time starter, or Andre Kojo, who would also be a first-time starter. And so Cole Hudson providing that stabilizing effect that Jake Majors provided at center is going to be critical. I always gave Jake Majors love because his snaps were always so good. Like, you didn't see quarterbacks having to pick up the ball off the ground like you did at Alabama a couple of years ago, where it looked like the snaps were bowling down a bowling lane as opposed to, being fired into the hands of the quarterback. So I think that's, Bill Parcells, I covered him when he was the coach of the Cowboys. He said the center is the most important position on the offensive line. He's like, I know the tackles have to deal with those pass rushers, but the center has to help make the calls and direct traffic and keep the center of the line from collapsing. So, Eric, what about on defense? Who's a player we're not talking enough about who could have a critical role on defense?
Yeah, I'll be a little bit quicker on defense. I think Leonga Lafau is a name to keep an eye on. Now, everyone says, all right, you have so many other choices, so many new guys, Kobe Black, Jalen Gilbo, Jelani McDonald, et cetera, right? Here's the thing for me. Anthony Hill is a dominant middle linebacker, and Anthony Hill is going to have an excellent year, knock on wood, he stays healthy. But you need that second linebacker. I hate to call him like second fiddle, because I think both spots, especially in today's college football, today's, defense, for the most part, it's a 4-2-5 look, right? So you're going to be playing two linebackers. You especially need that kind of off-ball linebacker to be excellent in coverage, kind of be a jack of all trades, right? But also be efficient when Texas goes to a three linebacker look. I think Lafau really, his role on this defense, just being that guy who can play off of Anthony Hill and do different things. And also, let's not forget, Lianga was a highly touted recruit coming out as well, right? So his ability to take his game to the next level. I believe while Colin Simmons, and I'm getting ready to write this in my three things I know, is going to wreck college football next year. I think the defensive line is going to be excellent. I think the secondary, not getting talked about enough, but I genuinely believe, as constituted right now, as we're taping on May 7th, the linebacking duo of Anthony Hill and Lianga Lafau is the strongest right now on this team in terms of just two guys, a position that you have solidified. So Lafau's, continued development, I think, isn't being talked about enough. And I think that has a huge role in not only helping, play off of Anthony Hill, but really makes this entire defense.
Yeah, that's a good call. And that linebacker core is going to be interesting because you got Trey Moore working some more at linebacker and Brad Spence. But Lafau is the guy I'll never forget. Jeff Choate saying elite pass dropper about Lianga Lafau. And we saw him get his hands on a football and he was around the ball. He had a safety. He's the only player who had a safety last year. Eric, I'm going to go with Derek Williams Jr. And I know he's a guy that, he's been around, but he's a guy who it looks like is going to be changing positions from safety to star. At least he'll get a look at star in fall camp. And I think that they handled spring football that way by playing, Wardell Mack and Grayson Littleton a ton at star in the spring, knowing that Derek Williams would, get that opportunity come, they'll have summer workouts and those 2 hours of practice that they get there. But then in fall camp, and Derek Williams is a guy who just makes plays. He only played in 4 games last year before he suffered the knee injury, the season-ending knee injury. But he had he had a big interception. He made plays in the Michigan game. He obviously had an interception in the OU game, and he just. He's a smart football player. And if you're trying to get all of your best 11 on the field, and it's getting crowded because there are some really talented younger guys coming up. I mean, I think Grayson Littleton is a guy who got a lot of love for his performance this spring. But
where's Grayson Littleton from, Chip, by the way?
Florida, Tampa, Wiregrass, right?
Wiregrass Ranch, played for my old high school coach, Mark Canner. There's the non-paid shout out right there. Tampa, Florida, baby.
Come on. So Derek Williams, because imagine a secondary with Michael Taft, second team All-American last year, Jelani McDonald, who I think both you and I think could be a all SEC type of safety. I know that's putting a lot on him, but he's that talented and he's got that big physical presence. He can run. He played corner in high school. And then you've got all the guys competing at corner, Jalen Gilbo, Malik Muhammad, Kobe Black, Warren Roberson, Cade Phillips. And then, the guys at star, Wardell Mack, Grayson Littleton, but Derek Williams, who's made some big plays in big games, is a guy who could really provide that veteran presence. We know he's physical. Okay, good stuff there. Eric, anything else on Texas football before we move on? Oh, well, Justin Tucker, I guess we should mention, he's been released by the Ravens. He's still the most accurate field goal kicker in NFL history, even though he struggled last year, but he's got off the field issues, been accused by 16 different massage therapists of inappropriate behavior. And he denies it. And that was a stunner because Justin Tucker was a goofy, funny character when he was at Texas. You know, he would sing opera in the showers, and I remember Emmanuel Acho saying that dude sings opera in the shower. And so, you know, my take on this, Eric, is either the Ravens don't believe Justin Tucker or they just don't want to deal with the headaches of this stuff playing out. There could be a suspension. He did struggle last year. It's just a kind of train off the tracks ending to a Hall of Fame career that was spent entirely with the Ravens. And I talked about this when I went to the Buccaneers-Ravens game in Tampa to watch Tom Brady set the all-time NFL sacked record. There were so many number 9 jerseys in the audience of Ravens fans, and he's won so many games, but you know, they call it not for long. He's had an unbelievable career, but still, I think he's got gas in the tank. You think anyone takes a shot on him?
Chip, see, that's where I think things get interesting, because if you believe he has gas left in the tank, and you believe, I don't have Justin Tucker's numbers pulled up in front of me, but we all know he had some struggles last year, right? If you believe that was a blip and not a trend, I think a team's going to take a shot on Justin Tucker. Where I think it gets interesting, and of course, I don't want to bury the lead here. I want to reiterate, being accused by 16 different massage therapists of inappropriate behavior, he's denied it, right? All those things need to be stated up front. I think, I'm not saying this to be flippant, Chip. I think it's substantive to make this point. I think there's a measure of believing, if a team believes some measure of guilt or innocence, right? Because let's just call a spade a spade. Given Justin Tucker's track record of success and how, premium having a good kicker is in this league, or just in general, someone would take a flyer on him, right? I mean, there's a reason Baltimore drafted someone, a kicker, I don't remember the kid's name, but in 4th or 5th round, right? So clearly they, in my mind, Chip, and this is just the opinion of me, they believe that it's not worth the hassle or the headache, right? And again, the statement I'm going to make is not to assign some level of guilt to Justin Tucker. I just think it's worth saying based on everything we're talking about, because we're not talking about a mediocre player. We're talking about someone who's going to be a Hall of Fame, or his numbers would be a Hall of Fame kicker. Chip, and any given Monday, there are probably about 20 of us who are there for pressers and doing scrums. If you took all 20 of us and asked us to come up with the same story outside of a Monday, we probably all couldn't do it. All right. So I'm sure there's some team is going to say not 1, not 2, but 16. That is what makes it tough. And I only say that as to reference to your question. If I think there's a future for him, I think that is the aspect that makes it really tough. We're not talking about a quarterback, right? Deshaun Watson, maybe you can, that level of quarterback, at least at the time. All right, maybe you're looking to bypass that. Kicker, I don't know if the return on investment is worth all of what's going to come with it.
Yeah, he missed 8 field goals last year, still 73%, accuracy. He missed 7 field goals in his 4th season in the NFL, but he typically is right around 2 or 3 misses per season. His unbelievable year in 2019 when he was 28 of 29 on field goals and was 10 of 11 on field goals, 40 to 49. And then in 2016, he was 10 of 10 on field goals, 50 plus. So he's set the standard, and it'll be interesting to see if there's an owner like Jimmy Haslam out there who was willing to take a chance on Deshaun Watson in Cleveland for a kicker, as you said. It's not as, it is important. It is, especially in the NFL, which is a field goal league. we'll see how that plays out. Eric, you wrote about Shawn Miller, Texas's new basketball coach, and his contract, which is coming up for approval by the Texas Regents. Tell us about Shawn Miller's new deal.
Yeah, it's coming up for approval today, as a matter of fact. Today and tomorrow, the Board of Regents are meeting. That will be one of the items on the agenda. It comes in $31.8 million, if memory serves me correct. They're having that number. The things that stood out to me, one, the number I know is fact, $4.8 million in his first year. That is going to put him, Chip, if you're just going off of last year's numbers, top 15 in the nation in terms of coaches and salaries. I think that's indicative of Texas's willingness to invest truly in basketball. This statement I've made has gotten me some heat on the boards, and I'll say it here again. Chris Del Conte spoke about wanting to compete for national championships. I appreciate that sentiment, and every athletic director in the nation should aspire to compete for conference titles and or national championships. I just would say, when has that ever been the standard for Texas men's basketball? It just hasn't in the history of the program. Go look at the number of Final Fours and number of Sweet 16s, Elite Eights the program has made. So in order to crack through, and we talked about this when Shawn was hired, I think it's the perfect marriage of someone who, as he noted, only John Chaney, the late John Chaney, has more wins without going to a Final Four than Shawn Miller. So you take, as CDC call him, that hungry dog, and you pair it with a program that's looking to break through that ceiling. I do think all the things line up, and the compensation, Chip, which is more or less, double what Rodney Terry was getting when he signed his deal. It's worth it. Shawn Miller's track record of success is speaks for itself. Just hasn't cracked through that ceiling there. So yeah, I'm not too stunned at the number. I know there's some people who had a little sticker shock and, man, that's a lot. But no, I mean, that's the going rate if Texas truly wants to be a player in this space. And Chip, real quick, before I pass it back to you, I believe it was 6 SEC coaches. So 6 of the 14 coaches that have higher salaries, at least based on last year's number, than Shawn Miller, were SEC coaches, right? So not only just to crack through and compete in the top tier of college basketball, in the SEC, that type of compensation, was necessary.
Yeah. So Miller's contract, he makes $4.8 million in his first year. Then it goes up $200,000 each year for the 6-year span of the contract, as Eric. So it finishes at $5.8 million in year 6. And, your hope is he does so well, finds players like he had at Arizona, like Aaron Gordon, who's killing it for the Nuggets in the NBA playoffs right now. That you got to give him a raise because he's being sought after by others. But Shawn Miller, nice piece of change right there. All right, Eric, Texas baseball. So, as you pointed out in your story, your 4 downs column that people need to check out over at horns247.com. Eric does a great job with his 4 downs column, comes out every Wednesday morning. The time that Jim Schlossnagle had been warning about from preseason, saying this conference is a gauntlet, this conference is a meat grinder. It's finally come. And he actually said last Tuesday, after a win in a midweek game, that this trip to Arkansas will be a firestorm. And it was. Texas was swept, gave up 28 runs in 3 games. 14 of those runs were scored by players who were walked or hit by pitches. It was uncharacteristic of Texas from a pitching standpoint. And they only had 2 hits in game 1. I mean, the pitching for Arkansas was outstanding, and they have big power arms at Arkansas, Eric, and they got guys who can hit the ball over the fence. So it finally happened. And you covered the win over Lamar last night. Your thoughts?
Yeah, just super quick, just kind of piggyback off what you said. Jim Schlossnagle said this time was coming, right? I thought some of the talk was stupid. And I don't know how much validity I even want to put in it, but some folks in the SEC blogosphere, I think that's the best way to put it, right? We're talking, Texas, they're a byproduct of their schedule and getting games at home. Well, they still had to beat top 10 teams in the nation, right, to rise to number one. But like you said, Jim Schlossnagle said this time was coming, right? You're not just going to blow through the SEC schedule and think you're going to win every series, take 2 out of 3 or sweep, right? Were there some things that were concerning? A little bit. I think the bats, Chip, and that aspect probably was due, considering they'd been playing over their head. When you don't have a Max Blue in the lineup, right, you should take a dip. So they had been playing over their head a little bit. So to kind of spin it forward to Lamar, I think I'll give you a positive and a negative. The positive is this team continues to find ways to, and it sounds cliche, but just be gritty. Jim Schlossnagle said it's the most gritty team he's ever coached. It was a game where Cade Bing went 3 1/3 innings. Wasn't bad, but kind of got himself in a jam, and Texas had to make it a little bit of a bullpen game. Cody Howard, Hudson Hamilton, Ethan Walker do the job, kind of take Texas the rest of the way through. But Chip, a season high, 16 walks drawn by the Horns. That makes for a long night at the ballpark, as you know, Chip. And you got 16 walks and plenty of pitching changes. The downside was Texas stranded 15 guys on base. They loaded the bases 5 times. Jonah Williams came up 3 times with the bases loaded. Each time, they ended up stranding 3 runners. They were able to get a couple runs out of it, right? I believe Jonah's chopper, if memory serves me correct, accounted for one of those runs, one that he beat out. The shortstop for Lamar had no chance of getting him out at first. And also Kimball Schuessler, who was not too thrilled with being plunked in the back, even though it was only about 78 miles an hour. That drove in a run. He earned an escort up the first base line from the home plate umpire after being plunked. But yeah, you'd have liked to see the bats come through a little bit more in that case. But the positive, again, is just being gritty, finding a way to win, having different contributors. Casey Borba steps up, right? Drew 4 walks, then also drove in 3 runs. So that to me is the positive and the negative. And again, just to kind of put a cap on the Arkansas series, they were due. Arkansas, it's a tough place to go to. Chip, you can speak to this better than I. I'm not shading any Arkansas fans, but they live and die when the burnt orange and white comes to Fayetteville, right? So that was going to be an intense environment. I guess I've been there now, so I guess I can't just say you could speak, because I now have been there as well. So yeah, they were due in that sense, and we'll see what happens as they face a Florida team that, again, this is one of those, it's not quite a Mississippi State per se, right? But, not quite a world beater, as Chris Bennett notes. Yes, Eric did a team that I will not mention by name. I'm kidding. Old college rivalry. Did South Florida beat Florida yesterday? Yes, the USF Bulls did beat the Gators yesterday. So the Gators will come into Texas limping a little bit. But that should be a good series for Texas and Jim Schlossnagle, his club, to bounce back and at least take 2 out of 3 in my mind, Chip.
Yeah. Florida, they got swept by Georgia. They lost their series to Ole Miss. They got swept by Vanderbilt. They swept Missouri, but everybody has swept Missouri. They took 2 of 3 at Mississippi State, and they won the series against Arkansas. Now that was in Gainesville, and then they swept South Carolina. So from a SEC standpoint, they've won 5 of their last 6. So this is as hot as Florida has been coming to Disch-Falk Field this weekend. Eric, Texas softball is the number 3 seed in the SEC tournament. Texas softball, which was number 1 for a good part of the season, went up to OU, got swept. That knocked them down below OU, the number 1 seed, and Texas A&M, which also spent some time at number 1. And we remember Texas A&M and Texas had an unbelievable super regional here in Austin last year, and it looked like A&M was going to close out Texas, but Texas found a way in game 2 to get it to game 3, and then Texas beat A&M. But man, that program in terms of softball has been rock solid. Now, the Texas softball team is probably going to have to get past Florida first, which they've done already this season. Then they would play A&M in the semis for most likely the right to play either OU or Tennessee in the from the other bracket. But Eric, you wrote about Mia Scott, the talented senior. I think she's dating CJ Baxter, by the way, who played all 9 positions for Texas over the weekend in a win over Kentucky. Give us your thoughts on that move by Mike White.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned, because I know CJ had been at a couple softball games as of late, so that would make sense. Nevertheless, Mia Scott, for those who may not know, senior, appeared in her 241st game against Kentucky, season finale, and she set a program record. Chip played all 9 spots on the diamond, began her day at third base, ended her day catching, and then recorded the second out of the 5-inning run rule victory over Kentucky pitcher, and then got pulled. And she had a great ovation, and Mike White spoke about it post-game, saying that initially it wasn't his idea. Some of the players brought it to him, and then realized, hey, we have an opportunity to do something special. Just real quick, there was some chatter again on social media. Some people, saying, I didn't really like the fact that you played all 9 positions, made a mockery of the game. I don't see it that way, Chip. Listen, if this were an SEC tournament game or even a game of greater consequence, right? Kentucky was pretty much locked into, I believe they are the 13 seed, either 12 or 13 seed in the SEC softball tournament. They weren't going to rise any further. They were going to play an opening round game, right? A. B, the game when they kind of started, they being Mike White and Tech started making the moves, it was already, 3-0, kind of trending towards a game that, all right, this is going to be a run rule type of game as is, right? That to me doesn't violate the integrity of the game. If we're talking about something where, you're just doing something and it's a game against Oklahoma, right? Or, you're trying to show up an opponent, that's one thing. But this was a game that, again, Texas was pretty much locked into their spot in the SEC tournament. Kentucky was locked into theirs. And I want to give Kentucky's coach credit again, Rachel. I believe Rachel Lawson is her name, if memory serves me correct, Chip. For understanding that, hey, Texas is trying to do something, just double check. Rachel Lawson, yes. Understanding what Texas is trying to do and not taking offense to it, right? Or, doing something to really kind of interfere with that. Chip, it made for a nice memory for a senior who's played a lot of softball, here at Texas, and the fans in attendance on the sold out crowd at McCombs Field. So I thought it was a great thing to see. And again, for those who had an issue with it, I think they're taking themselves just a little too seriously.
Yeah. Impressive that they got all that done in a 5-inning run rule victory. All right, Eric, you ready for some take it or leave it?
Chip, I am always ready. Now we're ready, Chip. There we go. The banner's up. Ready for some take it or leave it.
We are ready. All right, who's serving first?
I am serving to you, so I will kick us off. Take it or leave it. Number 1, the top offseason priority for Texas's offense is short yardage and goal line situations. Take it or leave it, Chip.
You know what? I know I'm a prisoner of the moment. I'm going to take this because it's been a recurring problem, Eric. Obviously, the first and goal from the 1 on, against Ohio State with a chance to tie or take the lead with about 3 minutes left in the game, and then it all went to hell on the subsequent plays. And, you go back to the 2023 season, the first and goal from the 1 against OU, they didn't get in. They lost that game. And then TCU, the 17-10 game where they had first and goal from the 2. This is back in 2022. First and goal from the 2, first and goal from the 5. They come away with only 3 points in a 17-10 loss. No touches for Bijan Robinson either in either of those situations against TCU in the third and fourth quarter. So yeah, they got to develop an identity in those short yardage and goal line situations. I don't know if it's the tush push or what, Eric, but there's got to be a better identity down there I'm taking this. How about you?
Chip, I'm leaving it. Texas had gotten better. They had performed better in goal line situations at moments in the 2024 season, definitely better than they performed in 2023. And I wrote about this. That's one of the first things I wrote for the site. Texas's short yardage and goal line struggles actually date back to the 2022 season. So it's not like this is, yes, the failures have been spectacular because they came in Red River Shootout, Cotton Bowl, right? Major moments. But I just think for this year's team, of course, that'd be number 2 for me, Chip. Number 1, I think, is making sure that Arch Manning doesn't resemble his grandfather back when he's playing for the Saints, right? Running for his life. I think that is the top off-season priority, just rounding out this offensive line. Again, I'm not expecting it to look like the group that's played together for years and had 4 starters drafted, or 3 players drafted in the NFL, lost 4 starters. But just can it be solid? Can it make sure that, Chip, what made the difference when Georgia came to Austin last year? It was that Georgia defensive line that made life hell. I guess I shouldn't say the difference. There were a lot of things that made a difference in that game, but one of the major differences was Georgia's defensive line making hell on Texas's quarterbacks, right? So that, to me, is the top priority, Chip.
Okay. All right, take it or leave it. Number 2. Eric, CJ Baxter from the great state of Florida will finish the 2025 season with more than 659 yards rushing and 5 TDs. Those were his totals from the 2023 season. Take it or leave it.
Chip, I am torn on this one because I'm looking at it this way. If Texas plays 16 games, right, there's going to be room. I mean, that's 16, quick math there. That's not even, 60 yards per game, right? However, how does this offense look different with the Arch Manning factor using his legs, right? That's probably going to take however many designed runs Steve wants to put in there. And he's been adamant that's not going to be a ton, but it's still going to be carries taking away from Quintrevin Wisner and CJ Baxter. I am going to, because I do believe Texas reaches the national semifinal at least next year, I'm going to take it, Chip. That's 50 yards per game, provided CJ stays healthy. I'm going to take it.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think this is going to be very interesting because if you look at last year, Quintrevin Wisner, 226 carries, 1,064 yards rushing, 5 touchdowns. Jaden Blue, 134 carries, 730 yards rushing, 5.4 yards per carry, 8 touchdowns. And Jarek Gibson had 78 carries for 377 yards and 4 touchdowns. And I could very easily see Quintrevin Wisner, CJ Baxter, and don't rule out James Simon as that number 3 back because I was told he's Jarek Gibson with better hands. But you know what? I'm going to say he comes in just below. And I guess we're saying both totals. Right. So I'll say he comes in just below this, but probably right at this number. So I'm going to leave it. Eric, take it or leave it, number 3.
To bring us home, take your leave at number 3. Texas baseball gets back on the winning track, by taking its weekend series against the Florida Gators. Take it or leave it, Chip.
I'm going to take this. Texas has been so good at home. So I'm going to take this, Eric. How about you?
I am going to take it as well. Like I said, I think Texas has room to bounce back. I think they will bounce back. And they've shown track record. This is a good baseball team. It's not it's a good baseball team. They're a better baseball team than Florida. They've played well at home. I will take it, Chip.
All right. Well, there you go, kids. Hey, thanks everybody for tuning into this episode of the Flagship Podcast. Please remember to like and subscribe to the Horns247 YouTube channel so that you get all the notifications. Remember, we got the State of Recruiting podcast coming back online. And until next time, for Eric Henry, I'm Chip Brown. We'll see you over at Horns247.com, where you need to be an annual member so you get VIP access to all the team sites on the preeminent 24/7 sports network. Stay safe, everybody, and keep the faith.